Hi, I'm Mackenna. I am a fiction candidate at the MFA program here at Bowling Green, and I'm going to be reading some of my short fiction and creative nonfiction for you today. I'm going to be starting with my first story, which is both the longest and the oldest of the pieces that I'll be reading today. It's called What Keeps Him There. If you were to walk through the front door of his ranch-style house, you would have to walk through each and every one of the small rooms before reaching the door to his bedroom. You might think that the short walk promised by the meager square footage would be uneventful, but you would be walking through much more than a house. Around every corner you would be greeted by the ghost of a life you do not know. Through the living room and the kitchen and dining room, you'd walk his footsteps and find the energy of a stranger's intimacy surrounding you. And by the time you found yourself facing the dark oak wood of his bedroom door, you might even think that you know him. The first thing you notice about the house is its isolation. You would have to travel 5 miles down the crackled black road in either direction before so much as catching a glimpse of another home. Perhaps you find this odd. You might find yourself wondering how anyone could need so much space. Or maybe you take a deep breath and the air tastes of freedom without the scent of civilization on its tail, and it isn't hard for you to see the appeal in all of the open space that some might call loneliness. Setting your path towards the front porch, you notice how the cracked yellow paint adorning the home matches the sunshine falling around it. There is an energy about it that makes you smile, and so, when the old porch steps groan and protest as you begin your ascent towards the home, you are not deterred. It looks, after all, like a happy house. With that thought, you reach the front door, turn the knob, and walk into the first room. You find yourself standing in a sparsely decorated living room. The only furniture in the space is a well-worn brown leather chair and a blue and white striped love seat. The brown chair is wrinkled with age. The cracks in the leather look like the lines around an old man's smile. You can still see an impression in the center where its owner last sat. It looks at home in the modest living room. The love seat, however, looks peculiar in its vacancy. Unlike its leather counterpart, it looks unlived in. Not new, just out of use, like furniture on display at a thrift store. There is an air of misplaced reverence about it. You don't think on it for too long. You quickly come to the conclusion that he likely doesn't entertain many guests, and he himself must prefer the brown chair. Unconcerned, you allow your attention to shift. Both the pieces of furniture are facing a bulky square TV that looks like it might be older than the house itself. If you were to turn it on, you would be accosted by a high-pitched ringing. The small screens groan as it wakes up and comes to life. You think for a moment before you leave the room that you must not use the outdated device enough to warrant replacement. Moving on, you reach the kitchen. The light filtering in through wide windows bounces off sage green walls, making this room feel warmer than the last. You don't notice, but even the air is lighter in here. Your eyes skip over the rustic wood countertops and outdated appliances and fall straight to the vintage brass record player positioned in the farthest corner. It looks like it came from decades before, and yet it's so well taken care of that it might have been new. You cannot help but imagine the smooth sound of jazz slipping from the machine and filling the room. You can practically see buzzed bodies dancing, spinning. You can almost hear the laughter. You can't restrain yourself from reaching out to touch the needle hovering over a waiting record, willing yourself to feel the joy it must bring. It really is beautiful, but you don't spend too much time admiring the antique. Instead, you walk through the large archway into the next space. The dining room is nothing like the kitchen. The lights are switched off and the curtains are drawn. The room's only source of light sifts in from the kitchen, the bright rays like intruders in the night. There is an inch of dust that lies on the table, and if it were the only room you saw in the house, you might think that no one had lived there for years. You take a breath and shiver as you feel yourself swallowing the ghosts of the room. There is a taste left on your tongue from the stale air, the taste of mold mingling with sorrow. Suddenly, you feel as though you are trespassing. The house might belong to a stranger, but this room belongs to a darkness that is somehow less than human. You cannot help but want to escape as quickly as you can. You slip into the short hallway and wish briefly that you had spent just a moment longer studying the brass record player. The small hallway is just as dark as the dining room. You don't feel compelled to open any of the smaller doors along the corridor. You try to convince yourself that they must only be closets and then walk faster, not allowing your thoughts to linger on what lies behind closed doors. Before you know it, the hallway ends and you are left staring at a closed bedroom door. Something about the way the door is set on its hinges makes it look as though it were meant to be closed, like it had never been open. Still, with a compulsion you don't recognize, you twist the knob and are surprised at how easily it sways open, inviting you into the room with a hint of sarcasm lurking in the quiet squeak of the hinges. First your eyes land on his bed. It's messy and unmade, and yet only one side looks as if it has been slept in, like someone had been afraid to disturb the emptiness of the other half. Your eyes scan the room uncomfortably, afraid to linger on anything too long. With growing discomfort, the walls of the room seem to close in on you. Is it all in your head, or is it really getting harder to breathe? Then you see him. He sits at an empty desk on the far end of the room, facing what you now realize is the only window. His eyes trained intently on an old willow tree in the backyard. If you approach him slowly and silently, careful not to rouse him from his trance, you might get close enough to hear him mumbling in a broken whisper, "Tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow." You're afraid to even flinch as the taste of bile rises in your throat. You can't bring yourself to stand in the sadness any longer. You turn and walk from the room, not bothering to close the door behind you. You hurry through the hallway and try not to breathe the heavy dining room air. You know your lungs can't stand the weight of it. Rushing through the kitchen, you glance at the record player and notice that it looks suddenly less joyful, but you don't look twice at the old TV or the empty love seat. You don't want to risk looking too closely. Going out the same door through which you came in, you leave. Yes, if you were to walk through the front door of the aged yellow house, in the end, you would leave. You would leave and try to forget the man and his broken home. You would leave and never look back. You would leave and you would never know. You would never know that the house was so far removed from the world because it was the first house in their budget that the man could find that was painted yellow. And he wanted his wife to think of sunshine every time she walked through the door. She smiled too the first time she saw the place. And she told her husband that Vincent van Gogh used to swallow yellow paint so he could be as happy inside as the paint looked on his canvas. He had smiled when his wife first shared that anecdote. He had thought it silly, funny even. Now, whenever he thought of the story, he cursed himself for picking a house that was painted in someone's poison. You would never know that he came home from work every day in time to watch the 6 o'clock news on that old TV. It had been his wife's favorite program and the only one they ever watched together, sitting on that blue and white love seat. Every night, at the end of the reports, the anchors made time for some seemingly silly, light-hearted anecdote, and she would smile. Some days it would be the only time she smiled all day. He had fallen in love with that smile, but now the thought of it brought tears to his eyes. He never sat in that love seat anymore, and when the TV was on, his eyes were intent on the empty cushions, as if he could will her to appear there again. Still, each night he turned the little box to Channel 6 and he thought of her. The stories didn't seem silly to him anymore. You would never know that the record player in the kitchen had been a wedding gift, and when his wife got into one of her dark moods, he would put on their favorite songs and ask her to dance. They would spin around the kitchen until he could feel her heart grow lighter. These days he would let the music fill the empty space. He would close his eyes and try to float on each and every note up through the ceiling and closer to her. You would never know that the dining room was so dark and dusty because he hadn't touched it in months. You would never know how it made him think of the nights when she was feeling okay and would have dinner waiting for him when he got home. They would sit across from each other and laugh about the people at work or the phone calls she had with her mother. But the room hadn't heard laughter in months. He didn't find things funny anymore. You would never know that on the nights when he manages to sleep at all, he is careful not to slip into his wife's side of the bed, because then she might think that he had forgotten her, that she doesn't have a place in their home anymore. You would never know that he had been staring out that window for more weeks than he could count, and when he looked at that tree and whispered to himself it was a prayer that tomorrow he would find the strength to cut the damn thing down. He prayed that he wouldn't have to look out that window and remember how he came home to find her there, the way she swayed sickly reminiscent of the way they had danced. Yes, maybe tomorrow he would cut it down and he would leave. But the next day would come and go, and the tree would stand, and he would stay. And you would never know why. You would never even stop to wonder what it was that kept him there in the brokenness you weren't strong enough to stand. Okay, so there's that story. The next two pieces that I'm going to read are creative nonfiction. The first one is very, very short, and then the next one is quite a bit longer, but they're both flash pieces. So, when I met you, really met you for the first time, we were in a dark room with hundreds of empty chairs. When I went to flip the lights on, you stopped me. No, don't do that. You never explained, but we left them off. Maybe some things aren't meant to be lit up. So like I said, that one's quite short, but this next one's much longer. All right. Have you ever stood so still that you could feel the membrane between your skin and the atmosphere thinning? Have you ever let yourself be so silent that you can hear a faint sizzling sound as pieces of your consciousness bubble up and drift off to fill the space around you? Have you ever become the ghost that haunts the ruins? When I was 16, I started hanging out with a group of friends who spent a lot of time ghost hunting. To translate, ghost hunting in upper middle class suburbia usually means sneaking into abandoned buildings and pretending to be brave when you hear voices in the wind. I never really believed in ghosts, but I believed in energy. Every person has their own unique energy. In the collision of different lives where the energy begins to melt together, magic happens. That kind of thing leaves a mark long after we are gone. So I would follow this group of people into these abandoned places and roll my eyes as they started posing questions to the spirits residing in the emptiness. But I could never deny that I felt something there. I could feel the residual energy of lives that passed through in the way that you might feel shoulders of strangers brushing up against you in two crowded rooms. Soft, unintentional, but demanding to be felt. So no matter how stupid I found their antics, I would come with them over and over just to feel it again. It wasn't long before I started going back to the haunted houses alone. I remember the first time more clearly than I can recall most of my other memories. There was this old abandoned Catholic school on a back road outside my hometown. It was locked down pretty well, so we never could get inside. But there was this strange, dilapidated playground on its side. I was driving by one night on my own when I felt this urge to pull over, so I did. There was a rickety old swing set, rusted all over and covered in dirt, but I didn't pay that much attention. What I was really interested in was the wooden playhouse attached to it. The house was made from plain wooden planks, although calling it a house was a stretch. The structure consisted of 4 walls and no ceiling to speak of. I walked in through the hole where the door used to be, the hinges still rusted around the frame, and had to duck to fit through. It wasn't surprising what I found inside, but it felt almost surreal. The room's rectangular floor was littered with leaves and pieces of children's toys, a plastic plate from a kitchen set, a doll stroller thrown on its side, and pieces of plastic that could have been from anything, but I couldn't find their source. There was shattered glass in the center of the space. It looked to be part of a window, and there was a screen lying beside it, but the house had no windows at all. On the back wall there was a ladder. Not knowing what to expect, I climbed up. I only had to take a few steps up to see over the top. It opened out onto what looked like the outline of a deck, but there were no floorboards, just an empty square and nowhere to climb to. I looked out over the hill in front of the school and into the busy road. It was strange. When I looked at the cars as they passed, I felt part of the world, aware that I was trespassing and afraid that one of the sets of headlights would belong to a cop. But when I stepped down off the ladder and was back inside those 4 walls again, there was nothing. I didn't hear the cars passing by. I didn't feel the raindrops that started to fall gently, slowly, their descent blocked by the thick trees overhead. It was impossibly quiet, impossibly still. The air around me was thick with dust and history. There was something about the room that made me feel like it contained an entire universe in those 4 walls. A universe of shattered glass and borrowed memories that I alone inhabited. I closed my eyes and felt as though I had expanded into all the corners, filling the space with my being. Suddenly, in the absence of the outside world, I was the only thing pressing in on myself, and the weight was too much. My lungs began to hurt from the ragged, almost panicked intake of air. I always said I wanted to find myself, but I never meant I wanted to find only myself. I never wanted to be that island universe. It was the most exquisite discomfort, an ache with enough sugar lining the edges to make it worth craving. I don't remember leaving the school. I must have, of course, but I don't know how. I don't know how you walk away from isolation that pure. I tried to find pictures of the playset while I was writing this, but I couldn't find any record of its existence. I found galleries full of pictures of the school, but none that included the house. I even found the school on Google Maps, but the trees were positioned perfectly so that I couldn't see it from above or any angle on the street. It's almost as if it had never existed, never been real at all. If I want to see it again, I'll have to return to that place and taste that isolation again. I can't decide if the premise of going back is exciting or merely terrifying. So that's that piece. I actually did go back to find the playset after I wrote the story. So here's a picture of it in case you were wondering what it looked like. But I didn't get out of my car. I think that some things are just better off experienced once. Okay, well, I have one more story. It's a flash piece that is fiction, and it's called Scissors and Strings. The man who holds the scissors has always loved his job. I'll tell you why if you'll listen, or at least I will try. If you could snip away the curtains of time and space, you would find the room where he lives. I say if you could because, of course, you can't. But just because your minuscule consciousness cannot navigate its way to the vastness of that room does not mean it doesn't exist. Beyond the curtains you can't even touch, he is there with his silver shears, and he will do his job whether you believe in him or not. I suppose you want to know what exactly this job is, what it is he does with the silver shears. If I were you, I would wonder. Of course, you already know, at least in some far-off corner of your mind. Even though you cannot see him, you feel him, or rather, you feel what he does. You see, his job is to cut the strings. What do you mean, what strings? Your strings. Oh, yes. Sometimes I forget how little you all know. Allow me to explain as best I can. You'll try to keep up, won't you? Each of you is born with strings attached. For every little thing that keeps you tethered to your earth, there exists a string that runs from your soul into the universal, the Gaia soul, that hangs above the room where he works. You have a string for everyone you will come to love, every goal, every dream. You have much heavier strings too, strings for your fears and your ignorance. You're also quick to forget how much your darkness holds you in place. You even have a string, the thinnest one of them all, for your heartbeat itself. The strings don't hang from your body, not materially at least. As I said before, if you do recall, they hang from your soul. Now, of course your soul's in your body, but it's also in his room. No, it's not halved or chopped up or mutilated in any way. Mercy, child, do you know nothing of your own nature? Your soul is transitory, and it cares little for earthly boundaries of time, space, or flesh. If I were you, I wouldn't waste your energy trying to wrap your finite mind around that particular concept. I simply don't have the patience to walk you through it. As we speak, your soul is floating in his room. Well, not floating, hanging. Your strings rise up beyond what even he can see. Although I've climbed up there myself before, and let me tell you, the Gaia soul is... Or maybe that's better left to mystery. It does not do you well to know too much. Regardless of where it is they lead, his job is to cut those strings. Think of it like this. Every time you say a last goodbye, you lose a string. Every time a dream becomes a memory of a failure, you lose a string. Every time one of those little things that seem so eternally important to you ceases to be, you lose a string and your soul becomes more and more unsteady. Snip, snip, snap. It's a lovely sound, really, or at least he thinks so. Sometimes I watch him work and I hear him laughing as he goes, louder, louder with every cut he makes. I have a certain respect for the fulfillment he finds in his eternal work. One would think that he'd get bored of the same thing over and over and over, but no. The man with the scissors loves his job. Yes, I'm getting to that part. Do be patient, child. Well, as your soul loses strings and gains that sweet chaos of unrest, it begins to lose touch with the Gaia soul. For most of you, this happens as you age. You lose your strings slowly, almost innocuously at times, but you still feel them snap. Of course you feel them snap. Think for a moment, won't you? Think about the obvious ones, the losses you can't ignore. Have you not ever mourned the death of a loved one? Had your heart shattered by a goodbye? Tell me, little one, what does that feel like? Close your eyes for me, won't you? Remember the way the pain emanates from the inside out. Remember the cold consumption of that ache that vibrates from your heart to your veins to your bones until it becomes you. Can't you feel the sting of his shears? Can you really tell me that you didn't feel that string snap? Now don't look so worried. Most of you have a good many strings to count on, some more than others, of course. It's not so tragic to lose a few here and there. What's really something is when they all snap at once. I think he gets a little overzealous at times. He'll take a whole clump between the blades, sometimes hundreds at a time, and sever them in one clean motion. You've seen this before, I'm sure, or at least you've heard of it. A life snuffed out too sudden, too soon. Though I don't suppose it really matters in the end how or when the strings are cut. Whether all at once or one by one, until you're spinning pathetically on that one measly heartbeat string, you all end up the same. In the end, well, your end. You're all just soul fragments on the floor of a room you will never see. Well, on that upbeat note, that's all that I have for you guys, so thanks for listening.
I want to feel old joy, bold joy, younger than summer, allergy hell joy, pure sugared, possible love joy, Saturday heaven, real God loved me joy, baseball was safe, the future excited, Saint Sinatra was mine joy, my parents, my world, I was a boy joy, I was myself, no lonely, in a purple petaled dress, that old joy, that old joy. The poem's called Old Joy. Thank you very much for watching this right now, if you are. As you probably know, my name's Neal. I'm a first year student in the Master's of Fine Arts program at Bowling Green State University. And I got some poems for you tonight. I'm pretty much just going to keep rolling through them. It's a lot easier to read poems to an empty room than it is to talk about poems in an empty room. So I'm choosing the former, and yeah. This first batch of poems is it's kind of just stuff out of the last year. And I'm gonna hit you with the longest one, starting off while I got most of your attention. It's called One Person from Baltimore. Baltimore has the hardest work ethic out of all the cities. Makes you want to work harder. JPEG Mafia. At 4:30 a.m., there's high humidity on I-83 North. because it's August in Baltimore. In between the exits for Ruxton and 695, I see the fog gag the malls between the county's distant trees. Another day, another dollar to make to pay for all the other days ahead. This morning, I'm in love with the humility that holds hands with a work week. I think I just miss my parents. We sanctify the sacrifices of those before us, after all, and learn through mimicry. The world's sick, and I'm going to a grocery store before the night's fog lifts. We roll up to work as rough drafts of living beings and finger the time machine to begin our day. A corporate curation of music plays Safety Dance on repeat while we cut tape on cardboard again, and it never ends. It ends at 9. In come the first feeders of the day. 50-something white dudes in light blue polos buying red ginseng. White moms in kitschy hoodies making pleasantries with masks below their nostrils. Rich white people have big noses. Yes, reader, it's another pandemic poem. How can we not write about the scarcity of empathy revealed in some? We stock the shelves and replace what left with the feeders in their Range Rovers. My manager tells us patience is out of stock at all manufacturers. In our resting cave below the market, we share our stories of anti-maskers, panic orders, red hat wearers, a 2020 Decameron. My coworker Nick sighs and shakes his head. Fuck this place. Can't wait to get out. I give him a couple nods. Yeah, man, I agree. Timonium fucking sucks, I say, as Nick barrels on. Baltimore's just dirty. Detroit, I'm from Detroit. Detroit's got history. And I mean, yeah, Baltimore's got history, but it's dirty. Can't go many places and really feel safe. I like going to the docks, the Harbor Place area, though. He tacks on the last bit to pin a compliment to the back of his hand. If you think a city smells like shit, consider that what you shit on smells like shit. I hide this bitterness from Nick. My mother raised me to be polite. I danced the tap routine I learned young on how to be proud of Baltimore. Hamden's a nice spot. John Waters is from here. Poe lived here for a bit. Poe died here. Poe's here forever. And, I tell Nick like I'm letting him in on some morsel of Baltimore, F. Scott Fitzgerald lived here for a while, down in Bolton Hill. It's true, Fitz lived here while Zelda was cooped up in Shepherd Crack going crazy in the county. I inherited my disdain for Gatsby from my mother, and it spread to anything Fitz. I don't think he had anything to write, if Zelda didn't write. Nick just thinks it's cool that Fitz was here, but I know he wouldn't drive to see the house a couple blocks down from North Ave, where the squeegee boys and the homeless humans rotate stations at each median and corner, and the ash gray pigeons hedge a bed against the wind to win a respite atop a graffiti-bloomed billboard. Yeah, I guess it's cool, I tell Nick. He nods and goes about his share of the grocery labor. The conversation sticks with me as the day goes on, and it never ends. It ends around 2, when I pull out of a good parking spot with less than a quarter tank of gas. I stop at the Carroll Fuel on Cold Spring, with a back whose soreness betrays its youth, and a mind whose despair betrays its poetry. I make friends with the fat fly clambering atop the price ticker. Its eyes flicker in the sun like a stoplight, first red, then green. If the city were ever silent, you would hear a chorus of clicks from all the county drivers who check to ensure their doors are locked at red lights. White kids at community college told me they'd be scared to ride the bus. Fuck you. You hate Baltimore because you hate its people. You're not alone. Baltimore hates itself. There are truths about the schools, the crime, the number of bodies. Good weather days tease like fine food in mouths with abscessed teeth. Baltimore, do you raise us to hate you while you work to keep us within you? Baltimore, my dear definition of a city, look at your people who leave a bed to do what they must, even when they can't, and still give their dears an abundance of love, even when everyone else can slip into hell. Baltimore, I want you to love us back. Those growing vine-like in the city of ash. Mid-shift. What we are asking for is just relax. Damn. It takes a frost for us to pause and acknowledge the miracle of breath. Why don't we stop working and think about the luck we struck to even be alive? God knows we'll be back here tomorrow. This next poem's an older poem, but it is forthcoming in the next issue of The Fiddlehead. And it's called Myth of Life All Around This Place, and it's after Ada Lamone's poem In the Country of Resurrection. At a gas station on a beautiful day, I think of how we are the last generation. Who will have these days after us? To take them without notice, as if they are the loose change handed back with the cheap coffee I will half drink. We don't die old in the world we grew up in, and our memories are less than fossils. The weight of Auburn light on mute oaks, the soft strangle of Sunday nights. The world will not die, only people. As I pump gas, I gaze at the dogwood across the way. I let it peer into me, to see the rings grown around my bones, as if it will remember and one day tell the left behind bluebells about you and me, how we saw a dying bear and drove past it in fragile awe. We did not stop to dole out comfort, just turn the music up and let it die slowly, a fellow casualty of standing still. Leve sky. The meaning of death? The walk through rooms, thick with fluorescent fingerlings of eternity's anemones. What happens there? The intubations, the EKGs border the tumor's final minutes. Hades' needlepoint. Overnight, the reluctant phantoms call out to an abstained God. Present the case for my demise. The peace some find at the end. Does it last? The meaning of death. I forget how to breathe in this untimed year. Tonight and tomorrow, the sky laps up sorrow from its pond. That band of tadpoles paddles around its teeth. Small things frivol, while the big things fret. Alright, this is a poem I wrote yesterday, and I figured, for the sake of something fresh, I'll throw it in there. It's as fresh as it gets. New Year's Eve 2020. I prepare a roast for us to share in celebration of the year's end. The next will be better. Not a guarantee, just a hope. I plug the garlic into inch-deep incisions to ward off the bloodthirsty. It's a party of 4. Sprigs of rosemary I chop in division towards the infinitesimal. Half of them stick to the over-drizzled olive oil and slide slow along the rump in desperate friction, or determined to move only a certain distance. The other half I toss into the searing pan with the carrot nubs and onion innards. Tea cracks us canned cocktails while we boil the Brussels. Outside, the winter seeps its tendrils up through the sewer grates to reclaim some warmth for the underworld. J&J come in from this theft. The apartment's too hot, but that's a good problem. They bring the alcohol for the wake. Deep reds and hazy amber. We pour them in our scrying glasses of the past. After the banquet and 2-3 drinks, we are comfortable and escaped from the present. We talk like drunk people about heartbreaks and our youth's little secrets. Jay tells about a boy he kissed in puberty. He got quiet, almost reverent. He scratched his beginnings of a beard and stared into T's empty glass, as if he could see the very point in the past where paths separated. The evening wound down from there. Alrighty, so take a little break from the of all that. It's a different type of woof now. So I've been working on a project that's just a series of poems about the life of David Reimer, who he's very interesting in life, but born a boy, and after a botched circumcision, he was raised as a girl for the first 14 years of his life, and experienced a lot of gender dysphoria, and eventually, like, he felt like he was male, and when he went finally to talk to his father about it, his father kind of broke down and told him the truth about everything that had happened. So this poem is called "Birth of David," and it's about that conversation between the father and David. In one breath, stillness in the living room. 14 deceitful years heated into a skinny pane of glass. The child walks up to the lies, lays his hand, feels them corpse cold. The child asks for identification, The child asks for explanations. The father rises from the creaking wooden chair. He walks with the effort of one who has no bones. In a second breath, the father guides his mistless hand up against the ice-crisp wall of mistakes. He sees the desperate, whimpering child who he had intended to protect. This life ends here. The father's paw, heavy with guilt, shards the glass wall, and another life begins, touches his son. Alrighty, so this is another, this is not, I just realized this poem has the name Dave in it, but it's not about Dave Reiner. It's just a character. It's called Rehearsal for Manfred. Oh, Byron was trash, my brother Dave proclaims, in the after-school sun between Italian runs. He fucked his half-sister, then tried to spin it into art to make it better. Dave's always had a way with shame, how to bathe the names in it. He hasn't tongued mine today. Its shape changed last night, when he came in my bedroom a desperate quest to fill a void. His girl Louise sits beside him on the sawdusted backstage couch. She must notice he hasn't looked my way all day, more or less a stranger, not family anymore. Lou's obtuse, she fondles his curls. An audience sees tragedy wrangled under the lights. We work the scene where Dave begs me and six spirits for oblivion. I almost find forgetfulness, forgiveness in my essence, and break from script to tell him, last night I slept soundly, never stirred. Instead, thou mayst die, we chant. He will, I did. Alrighty, so this next set of poems, recently I've started actually like write more about my about like mental illness, and so yeah, this series of poems, this next few poems are just about that. Alright, so these next poems are, yeah, these next few poems all kind of go together. This next one's called Anamkara, and I might be mispronouncing that. I looked it up and I still might be mispronouncing it. It's an Irish phrase called, like, that means like soul friend or soul companion. Anamkara. Does it ever feel terminal? I ask my other depressed friend. I think no, he texts, because that would mean definitively it will kill me. I look up and blink my ponderings into the night. Right now it just feels probable, Elle continues. I affirm the feelings, affirm him. I'm glad he is alive. It is one thing to share sorrows with someone. The young woman at CVS has scars on her upper arm that mirror mine. We are bonded by these pink knolls of admission. Sometimes this life isn't enough. To share joys with others is the opposite of tragedy. Like finding a decent meal hidden within stacks of steaming shit, we sometimes laugh until it rumbles out along our bones, up into the brain's dormant pockets, down into the anum. Oh, the joy, so great. Sometimes this life isn't enough. I'm human, you're human, and I want us to live. I know worse will turn to worst before it gets better. We sleep without sleep. The best dream I have is normalcy, a mediocre day. For years, I have feared the idea of the unseen. Now I find I am still afraid of the real thing. It wasn't born in me, like the clumsy Grendel that fed me Klonopin out of its sea-slick palm. That night poison control told C to take me to the ER. I remember, regret closed in at the equal rate as panic when I dove too deep at Swan Lake and the surface looked like a painting of what could have been. Life was small. I felt close to God. I don't believe anymore. I feel close to an unbirthed word, the potential to be married to something undefined until me. Just before breath comes easy, a new Grendel sips a beer and laughs, spitting clear acid into the air of our gorgeous, meaningless world. I think you cut that last sentence. Okie dokie. My cat, I had to lock my cat in his room. He was being crazy. Stress of continued living. My new surrender is to the Axeman's schedule. My time, perhaps decided, with the hood and sharpening their blade with patience. Suicide's lure of control lost its dewy, verdant scent. I admit I sniff the bait still, once every couple of weeks. An old cat investigates errant kibbles. I don't want death. I want forgiveness for not ascending to the perfection nobody asked me to be. For struggling to breathe in the gossamer joys mixed with the stench of our human shit. Ooh, alrighty. I got two more for you before I'm getting out of here. Mackenna Finley's reading stories next. These are a couple more Baltimore poems. Baltimore. How I say where I'm from. The city that harbors tears and brave rats. Cry more. I want to tell you outsiders who wonder how to love such a place. When summer's riders sweep down Hartford in a chorus like machinated cicadas, and a calloused breeze touches your face with magical grace, try to tell me you feel anything other than God's guilt from forsaking a city whose children do not always get to choose what they give or what's taken. Myth of extra innings. I pause from scraping frost off the car and watch my gray emissions wisp away into the chill. I miss strict seasons and knowing what to wear. Last week it was 72. When will summer begin to freeze and canceled baseball games are consoled with snowball fights? People often ask why I love baseball. I offer a sentimental defense. It's peanuts. It's Baltimore. I loved it when I was young. I try to sell them on the experience, the beer, and the sound of humans snuffing the lights of summer. I admit that it's boring. I remind them of the beer. I tell them it's an honest fact that people look their prettiest at Camden Yards. I talk about the thrill of supposed bums snatching shame back from the night and spinning it into mud-rubbed glory. When all else fails, I explain how I love the romance of it all. A game could go on forever. Forever, isn't that beautiful? I'm always sad it doesn't matter to them. But it will end, they say. Everything has to end. My breath rattles heavy with chill, and my car's chemicals quail upward like a fungoed curve. Christ, they're right, I think. Even the best things end. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, I forgot I was going to have to say thank you. Thank you very much for watching, listening, putting up with my weird voices and whatever it is I'm doing up here. I greatly appreciate it. Means a lot to me. And you all have a good night.